My name is Hannah, and I never thought that the start of my Saturday morning would become the moment I began questioning everything about my marriage. I am telling this story because it refuses to leave me. Even now, when I smell freshly brewed coffee, my chest tightens and my hands go cold. It was supposed to be such a simple thing: one mug, one sip, one quiet weekend. Instead, it became the first crack in a wall I thought was unshakable. That morning began like any other. Pale sunlight spilled through the blinds, cutting stripes across the kitchen counter. The hum of the refrigerator mixed with the faint chirping of sparrows outside. Normally, I was the one who started the coffee. It was my ritual, the only part of the day that felt calm, predictable. But when I stepped into the kitchen, my husband Thomas was already there. He stood tall at the counter, two mugs placed neatly in front of him, his movements precise like he was performing in front of an invisible audience. His eyes caught mine and he smiled, but the smile was stiff, stretched across his face as if painted on. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Here's your coffee, Hannah. Drink it before it gets cold." At first, I almost reached for it without thinking, but then the steam rose, curling toward me, and I froze. The scent was off. Coffee should be warm, earthy, inviting. This was sharp, chemical, almost sour, with a bitter edge that caught in my throat before I even tasted it. My pulse jumped, pounding against my collarbone, but I forced my lips into what I hoped was a convincing smile. Across the table sat my sister-in-law, Sophia. She was elegant in that effortless way that always made me feel like I was trying too hard. Her hair tied back neatly, a pale scarf draped around her shoulders, her nails painted in muted tones. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, the spoon tapping softly against the porcelain mug. She barely looked at me, her gaze floating between Thomas and the butter dish in front of her. She did not notice the dread tightening around me like a rope. I lifted the mug in my hand, turning it slightly, pretending to blow on it. The smell scraped against my senses, a warning cloaked in steam. My first instinct was to set it down, to push it away, but another part of me, the part that had been conditioned to keep the peace, told me to wait, to watch, to act like nothing was wrong. Thomas slid into the chair beside me, closer than usual. His knee brushed mine under the table, and his hand rested flat on the wood as if to remind me he was present, in control. The kitchen clock ticked on the wall, each second echoing like a drumbeat in my ears. My breath came short and careful, my chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate rhythm, as though breathing too quickly would give me away. And then, without planning it, I moved. Sophia had leaned over slightly to reach for a napkin, leaving her mug just a little too close to me. In one fluid, practiced gesture, I placed mine down and slid hers closer, swapping them in a motion so quiet it almost felt invisible. My fingers trembled as porcelain scraped against wood. I was certain Thomas noticed, certain my heart pounding loud enough to betray me. But he kept his gaze lowered, his fork clinking softly against his plate. Sophia remained oblivious, buttering her toast with calm precision. I stared at the mug in front of me, the one that had been hers just moments before, and my chest constricted. My thoughts spiraled into one chilling question. What would happen if she drank from it? I lifted the mug carefully, keeping the act alive, pretending to sip. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Thomas glance at the cups. His smile was gone now, replaced with a hard, unreadable line across his face. His jaw flexed as if he were clenching down on something he could not say. A shiver crawled down my arms, goosebumps spreading in a rush. Sophia finally reached for her coffee, her face calm, her lips curling into a faint smile. She raised the mug toward her mouth, completely unaware that it was not the same cup she had stirred sugar into. My throat tightened. Every muscle in my body screamed to stop her, to call out, to shatter the silence with the truth. But I stayed frozen, paralyzed by the weight of the moment, my eyes locked on the thin ribbon of steam rising toward her face. Fear has a taste, I realized then. It was metallic, bitter, almost identical to the smell that had hit me moments earlier. That was when I knew this was not just coffee. This was a signal, a test, maybe even a trap. And as Sophia tilted the cup closer to her lips, I understood something life-altering. This moment would divide my life into before and after. What came next was something I could never have predicted, and it is the reason I am telling this story now. The mug lingered in Sophia's hand as if time itself had slowed, and in that stretched silence, every sound in the kitchen grew sharper. The refrigerator hummed like a warning siren. The tick of the clock was a drumbeat against my skin. Even the scrape of her chair seemed deafening. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, while Thomas's steady gaze pressed into me. He didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't move. He simply watched, and that quiet surveillance was more terrifying than any shouted threat. Sophia finally set the mug back down for a moment, distracted by a vibration from her phone. Relief flooded through me, though I masked it with a faint smile. I lowered my eyes to my plate, pretending to spread butter across a piece of toast I no longer intended to eat. My stomach churned too violently for food. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans, cinnamon toast, and something acidic I couldn't name. That bitter scent had already etched itself into my memory, and it clung to the inside of my nose no matter how hard I tried to breathe past it. The table should have felt warm, even comforting. It was supposed to be just another Saturday morning breakfast with family, the kind that drifts by in soft conversation and clinking silverware. That had been my expectation when I rolled out of bed. I pictured laughter, the comfort of routine, maybe even an hour of peace before chores or errands began. Instead, every detail betrayed me. The light was too bright, casting harsh shadows across Thomas's face. Sophia's perfume seemed overwhelming, almost suffocating. The polished silverware reflected light in harsh, blinding sparks. Nothing felt ordinary anymore. Sophia chatted lightly about a work project, her voice calm, her gestures relaxed. She didn't notice my rigid posture, the way my fingers dug into the napkin on my lap. To her, this was just coffee and breakfast, nothing unusual. She scrolled through her phone, showing me a picture of a new art installation downtown. I nodded automatically, but my mind was elsewhere. I studied the way Thomas cut his eggs with deliberate slowness, his fork scraping against porcelain. His eyes flicked up to me now and then, sharp and assessing, like a predator watching its prey. The truth was, I had known for some time that something was off. Not just this morning, long before. Thomas had grown distant in subtle ways. The kind of distance you can't measure with words but feel in the absence of small gestures. He used to refill my mug without asking. He used to rest his hand on my shoulder in passing. He used to laugh at my jokes. Those things had evaporated slowly, quietly, until I convinced myself they had never mattered. But in that kitchen, staring at the cup I refused to drink, all those tiny disappearances crashed over me. They had been signs. I had chosen not to see them. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself to stay calm, to avoid suspicion. But my body betrayed me. My hands trembled slightly when I reached for the butter knife. My throat tightened when I pretended to sip water. My chest ached with the effort of keeping my expression neutral. And through it all, Thomas's presence pressed closer, heavy and deliberate. Sophia, oblivious, leaned back in her chair and began talking about a friend's engagement. Her laughter filled the room, light and genuine, and for a moment I envied her ignorance. I wanted so badly to sink back into that bubble where coffee was just coffee and family breakfasts were ordinary, but I couldn't unsmell that sour chemical tang. I couldn't unhear Thomas's carefully measured words. Then there were the small details, the ones that might have slipped past me if not for the tension twisting through my body. The mugs were not from our usual set. They were newer, heavier, without the tiny chip on the rim I always recognized. The sugar bowl was pushed farther away from me than usual, closer to Thomas's side. Even the napkins were folded differently, tucked instead of rolled. Each detail whispered that nothing about this morning had been casual. It had been arranged. I glanced toward the window, watching the breeze stir the branches outside, and wished I could walk through the glass and keep going. I wanted to leave, to step into the ordinary noise of the street where neighbors walked dogs and kids rode bicycles, where nothing smelled wrong or felt staged. But I stayed, bound to the chair by fear and by the eyes of the man beside me. Sophia finally raised the mug again, lifting it toward her lips. I watched the liquid tilt, watched the steam brush against her face. My body screamed to intervene, but I sat paralyzed, caught in the tension of choice. I knew that if I acted too soon, I would reveal myself. If I acted too late, something irreversible might happen. The clink of her spoon against porcelain was the loudest sound in the world. My pulse pounded so hard I thought the table would rattle with it. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, his fingers drumming against the wood like he was counting down. I didn't know it yet, but that breakfast was only the beginning. What appeared to be an ordinary morning would unravel into something far more dangerous than I could have imagined. And though I tried to hold on to the illusion of calm, deep down I knew life in that house would never return to normal. This was not the first time I had felt that creeping sense of being cornered, though the steaks had never smelled as sharp or sat steaming in a mug. Sitting there, watching Sophia laugh lightly and raise her cup again, I couldn't help but remember the long string of moments that had led me here. Breakfast might have been the stage, but the play had been written long before. Thomas had always known how to control a room without ever raising his voice. When we first met, that quality drew me in. He seemed calm, steady, the sort of man who could keep storms at bay just by the set of his shoulders. But calm, I learned over the years, could also mean silent disapproval, the kind that stripped away your confidence slowly, piece by piece. The first time I really noticed it was during our second year of marriage. I had invited a couple of friends from work over for dinner. The evening seemed lighthearted, filled with laughter, until Thomas interrupted one of my stories with a cutting remark. "She exaggerates. She always does." He said it with a smile, and our guests laughed as though it were a harmless joke. But I saw the look in his eyes, sharp and deliberate, a small reminder that my voice could be dismissed whenever he chose. It didn't stop there. Little incidents piled up like pebbles in my shoes, each one too small to stop me in my tracks, but together creating constant discomfort. A birthday I had planned for myself that he forgot to attend because a last-minute work dinner came up. The way he once told Sophia, within my earshot, that she was the real heart of the family, while I stood there holding a tray of food I had cooked for everyone. When I tried to bring it up later, he brushed it off. "You're too sensitive, Hannah. It's not that serious." But it had been serious. It had been years of eroding trust, of standing in rooms where my words were twisted or ignored. Each slight was brushed aside, yet each one carved a deeper groove in the foundation of our marriage. The coffee that morning was not an isolated moment. It was a culmination. Sophia, too, had her part in this pattern. I remember the first Thanksgiving after Thomas and I married. I had worked for hours preparing a pie from scratch, nervous about impressing his family. When dessert was served, Sophia leaned over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Store-bought would have been easier." The table laughed, and I laughed too, because what else could I do? But later that night, lying awake, I felt the sting of those words burning hotter than any oven could. Another time, during a family trip, I discovered that the room reservations had been altered. Thomas and Sophia shared a spacious suite while I was placed alone in a smaller adjoining room. When I confronted Thomas, he explained it away as a simple mix-up and told me not to make a scene. But deep down, I knew better. Patterns do not form out of mistakes. They form out of choices. All of those moments pressed against me now as I sat in that kitchen, the smell of something wrong still heavy in the air. My body remembered each humiliation, each dismissal, each moment of silence I had forced myself to swallow. I thought about how often I had convinced myself to stay calm, to go along, to preserve peace that was never really mine. Peace, I realized, had always been their script, not mine. Sophia's laughter pulled me back into the present. She was telling a story about her office holiday party, about how she won a raffle for a weekend getaway. Her voice was light, unconcerned, a sharp contrast to the pounding of my heart. She sipped from the mug, my mug, the one Thomas had placed before me, and smiled, oblivious. I felt a wave of nausea crash over me, not just from the possibility of what was inside that cup, but from the sheer weight of everything it symbolized. Thomas leaned back in his chair, eyes flicking between Sophia and me. His lips curved into the faintest smile, but there was no warmth in it. It was the same expression I had seen the night at Forgotten Birthday, the same one he wore when dismissing my words. It was the smile of someone who believed he was in control. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Fear was still there, cold and relentless, but another feeling rose to meet it: clarity. This had never been about one cup of coffee. It had always been about power, about the slow erosion of my place in this family, about the way Thomas and Sophia's bond had been allowed to overshadow mine. The coffee was simply the mask torn away, revealing what had always been beneath. I sat straighter, forcing my hands to still on the table. My eyes met Thomas's, steady now, refusing to dart away. He held my gaze for a long moment, perhaps surprised by the steel he found there. Sophia kept talking, unaware of the silent battle being waged across the table. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. And in that ordinary kitchen, I felt years of buried doubts harden into something unmovable. I would not be dismissed again. I would not laugh away the sting or smooth over the cracks. Not this time. What I did not know then was that this resolve would soon drive me to actions I had never imagined myself capable of. Choices that would alter not just my marriage, but the shape of my entire life. The moment Sophia lifted the mug again, the air inside the kitchen turned so heavy, it felt like I was breathing through water. My pulse thudded so loudly I could hear it in my ears, and my palms pressed damp against the napkin in my lap. She tilted the cup, the steam curling around her face, and I waited for something to happen, for her to flinch, to cough, to notice that the coffee was not what it seemed. But she didn't. She simply sipped, smiled faintly, and set the mug back on the table as though nothing was out of place. The relief that washed through me was brief, fleeting, replaced almost instantly by a sharp wave of confusion. If there was something wrong with that coffee, why wasn't it showing? Was I imagining it? Had fear twisted my senses? My mind raced with questions, but one truth anchored them all. Thomas had intended that cup for me, not her. I shifted slightly in my chair, trying to hide the tremor in my hands. Thomas leaned back, his eyes steady on mine, the corners of his mouth lifting in a smile that wasn't a smile at all. It was recognition. He knew what I had done. He knew I had switched the mugs. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the table, a silent war humming between us while Sophia rambled on about a coworker's engagement party. My throat was dry, but I forced myself to take a sip of water, pretending to be casual. Inside, every nerve screamed. Sophia continued drinking, oblivious. She even complimented the flavor of the coffee, calling it stronger than usual, but in a good way. My stomach twisted. I wanted to scream that it wasn't a compliment, that she shouldn't be swallowing another drop, but my voice caught in my chest. If I said anything, if I revealed the switch, I would have to explain why, and that would unravel everything. Thomas's fork scraped against his plate with a slow, deliberate sound, like chalk dragged across a board. He was calm, too calm. He watched me more than he watched Sophia. It was as if her reaction didn't matter to him at all, as though the real test wasn't in the mug, but in whether I would drink what he had given me. The air smelled thick with roasted beans and something sharper, something that clung to the back of my throat no matter how I tried to ignore it. I glanced toward the window, toward the faint sound of children playing down the block, and wished I could walk out the door and join them in their ordinary laughter. Instead, I was anchored here, in a kitchen that felt more like a trap with every tick of the clock. Sophia set her cup down again and reached for another piece of toast. She was untouched, radiant even, her cheeks warmed by the sunlight streaming through the blinds. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt dread pool in my stomach. Because her well-being meant only one thing. I hadn't been wrong. The coffee hadn't been made dangerous for her. It had been meant for me. Thomas finally spoke, his voice casual, almost bored. "Coffee good today, isn't it?" His eyes were locked on me as he said it, though his words were aimed at Sophia. She nodded, agreeing, unaware of the venom wrapped in that harmless sentence. My heart slammed harder, but I forced myself to smile politely, as if I hadn't just heard a challenge in his tone. I tried to remind myself to stay calm, to hold my ground. This wasn't the time for confrontation. But even as I told myself that, I could feel something inside me tightening, hardening. Years of silence and dismissal, years of letting both Thomas and Sophia shape the narrative, years of swallowing the sting of their words, all of it coiled together until it became impossible to ignore. Sophia excused herself to take a phone call in the other room. The moment she was gone, the air between Thomas and me sharpened like glass. He leaned closer across the table, his voice low. "You didn't drink." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, quiet but cutting, and I felt the weight of it settle on my chest. I held his gaze, refusing to look away. "It smelled strange," I said softly, careful not to let my voice shake. His smile deepened, but his eyes remained cold. "Strange, huh? Maybe you're just imagining things." He said it the same way he had brushed aside countless other concerns, with the casual dismissal that told me he believed he could control the story. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't lower my eyes. Sophia's laughter drifted faintly from the living room, but I barely heard it. The world had narrowed to Thomas, to the unspoken battle stretching between us. I could feel the weight of years pressing down, all the moments when I had chosen silence, all the times I had laughed along to keep the peace. And I knew then that silence was no longer an option. I set my water glass down with steady hands. My voice, when it came, was calm, firmer than I expected. "I know what you did, Thomas." For the first time that morning, his expression faltered. It was only for a heartbeat, but I saw it, the crack in his mask. Then he leaned back, folding his arms, his smile returning but tighter now, strained. "Careful, Hannah," he murmured. "You don't want to start imagining things that aren't there." But I wasn't imagining. Not anymore. And as Sophia's footsteps approached, returning from her call, I understood something vital. This morning was not just an accident, not just a bad smell and a cup of coffee. It was a line drawn in silence, and I had just crossed it. Sophia returned to the table, still smiling from her phone call, dropping her device beside her plate as if nothing in the world could touch her lighthearted mood. She picked up the mug again, took another sip, and carried on about her coworker's upcoming wedding. To her, breakfast was still just breakfast. To me, the air was thick with unspoken words, and the weight of what I had said to Thomas moments earlier pressed hard between us. I had told him I knew, and though Sophia had missed it, his eyes had not. They stayed locked on me, steady, cold, as though daring me to repeat it out loud in front of her. I did not. Not yet. The atmosphere shifted. Sophia's chatter filled the silence, but the undercurrent was tense, sharp, invisible threads tying Thomas and me in a battle no one else could see. Every clink of silverware, every scrape of porcelain seemed exaggerated. I tried to focus on the plate in front of me, but my appetite was gone. The toast sat untouched, butter congealing in the warmth of the room. The coffee cup that had once been mine still sat near Sophia's hand, its contents slowly cooling. My heart pounded every time she lifted it. Then Thomas spoke, his voice smooth, calculated. "Funny how quiet you are this morning, Hannah. Usually you're full of stories." His tone was polite enough on the surface, but the barb beneath it was sharp. Sophia laughed softly, oblivious, and chimed in, "Yes, you're usually the one who keeps conversation going. Are you feeling okay?" She looked at me with what might have been concern or curiosity. I couldn't tell which. I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." Inside, I was anything but fine. My mind spun, rehearsing every choice I had. To confront Thomas directly, to pretend nothing was wrong, to confide in Sophia, which I quickly dismissed. She had never been on my side before. Why would she start now? The memory of her past jabs, her casual undermining of me in front of family, stung like fresh wounds. If I told her the truth, she might laugh, or worse, she might tell Thomas what I had revealed. The tension grew unbearable. My hands shook as I reached for my water glass, and Thomas noticed. He leaned closer, his words barely above a whisper. "Careful, Hannah. You wouldn't want anyone to think you're paranoid." The implication landed heavy between us. He wanted me silent. He wanted me doubting myself. But something inside me had shifted. The years of enduring quiet humiliation, the way my voice had been muted in this family, the countless moments I had swallowed my instincts, all of it swelled to the surface. I couldn't laugh it off this time. Not when I had seen his mask slip, not when I knew the coffee had been intended for me. Sophia set down her fork, glancing between us. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice light, but her eyes narrowing slightly. Thomas chuckled, a hollow sound. "Nothing at all. Hannah's just a little jumpy this morning." His gaze burned into me, daring me to disagree. I felt my throat tighten. This was the moment. Years of silence screamed at me to speak. My voice came steady, firmer than I expected. "That's not true. Something was wrong with that coffee, Sophia. I could smell it." The words dropped like stones into the stillness. Sophia blinked, confused, then looked at her mug. "What do you mean? It tastes fine." She laughed nervously as though trying to brush it off, but her hand trembled as she set the cup down again. Thomas leaned back in his chair, arms folded, smiling as though amused. See what I mean? Paranoid. His voice was smooth, dismissive, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He thought he still controlled the narrative. But Sophia's expression shifted. She sniffed the cup again, frowning now, really paying attention. It does smell different, she admitted slowly. Her gaze darted between Thomas and me, searching for answers. My pulse raced, but I stayed quiet, letting her come to her own realization. The silence stretched. Finally, Sophia set the cup down with finality, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Thomas, what did you put in here? His mask cracked again. Just a flicker. His jaw tightening, his smile faltering, but it was enough. He recovered quickly, shrugging. Don't be ridiculous. It's just coffee. But Sophia's eyes stayed locked on him now, suspicion flickering there. For once, I wasn't the only one seeing through him. The balance in the room shifted, subtle but powerful. I straightened in my chair, my voice calm but unwavering. It wasn't meant for you, Sophia. It was meant for me. The words hung there, heavier than the smell that still lingered from the cup. Sophia froze, her face pale, her hand withdrawing slowly from the mug. She stared at Thomas, waiting for him to deny it. But he didn't. He only sat there, silent, his smile gone. In that moment, I knew the truth was no longer mine alone to carry. The silence that had kept me trapped for years had been broken. The look on Sophia's face told me everything. She understood. Maybe not fully, maybe not all at once, but she had seen enough. Thomas finally stood, pushing his chair back with a sharp scrape against the floor. He muttered something about work, about being late, but his voice lacked the calm confidence it usually carried. He left the kitchen without another word, footsteps heavy against the hallway tile. Sophia and I sat in the aftermath, the weight of what had just unfolded pressing down on both of us. Her eyes met mine, wide and searching, but I said nothing more. I didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than words ever could. Sophia sat frozen after Thomas stormed out, her fingers still curled around the edge of the table, as though letting go would make the moment slip away. The kitchen felt impossibly quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock and the distant hum of a lawnmower outside. My chest rose and fell with uneven breaths as I tried to absorb what had just happened. For years, I had carried the weight of doubt, wondering if I was imagining the subtle cuts, the whispered dismissals, the strange shift in my marriage. But that morning, in the span of a few sips of coffee, the truth had surfaced. I was not imagining anything. Sophia turned to me, her face pale. Hannah, do you really think? She trailed off, the question unfinished, as though saying it out loud would make it more dangerous. I met her gaze and nodded once. There was no need to embellish, no need to twist the story. She had seen enough herself. She had smelled the bitterness in the cup. She had noticed the crack in Thomas's mask. Her expression shifted, fear mingling with guilt, perhaps for the time she had stood beside him instead of beside me. We sat there in silence, the coffee cooling between us, until finally I stood and carried both mugs to the sink. My hands shook as I poured them out, the dark liquid circling the drain like something poisonous being flushed away. It was a simple act, but it felt like a turning point. I would not drink what I was handed anymore. Not literally, not figuratively. Sophia whispered, "What are you going to do?" The question rang in my ears long after she asked it. What was I going to do? For years, I had played the role expected of me. The quiet wife, who smoothed over tension, who accepted apologies that never came, who laughed off comments that cut deeper than anyone knew. But sitting in that kitchen, watching Thomas leave without a single word of denial, I realized I had already started doing something. I had broken the silence. I had spoken the truth. And even if it had cracked the air wide open, it was better than suffocating under years of pretending. The days that followed were not easy. Conversations with Thomas turned sharp and short. Sophia kept her distance, caught between loyalty and suspicion. The house felt colder, the rooms emptier, but for the first time, I no longer mistook emptiness for peace. It was clarity, harsh but necessary. I replayed that morning over and over, the way fear had wrapped around me, the way Thomas's words had dripped with control, the way Sophia's expression had shifted when she realized something was wrong. And each time I replayed it, my spine straightened a little more. because the lesson was clear. Silence only serves those who wish to keep you quiet. By speaking, even in the smallest way, I had taken back a piece of myself. What I want anyone listening to take away from my story is this: trust yourself. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore the signs just because they are small or because others tell you that you are overreacting. Your instincts exist for a reason, and silencing them only gives more power to those who thrive on control. I don't know exactly where my story will end. Life rarely wraps itself into neat conclusions. But I do know this: I will no longer sip quietly from cups handed to me without question. I will no longer let someone else decide whether my fears are valid. And if you've ever found yourself in a room where your voice felt smaller than everyone else's, I want you to remember that your truth matters, even if speaking it shakes the walls. If you've followed my story this far, thank you. Sharing it has not been easy, but I believe in the power of telling the truth, even when it trembles. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of resilience, of finding strength in the most unexpected places, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the smallest choice, like speaking up or clicking a button, can change more than you think.